up guys, it's VB and this is gonna be a bit of a different video. When this comes out, it will probably be somewhere between October 7th through October 13th. I'm recording this on September 1st, just so that way I remember to actually do it. The reason why I'm going to be posting this on this specific time frame is because on that time frame it will be Mental Illness Awareness Week in the United States. And I thought maybe I could talk about it. Now, I don't really like talking about myself on the channel just because I'm a very paranoid and private person. For good reasons as well as reasons of how I've grown up. So let's do this little draw your life thing or whatever this is going to end up being, and let's just talk. When I was a kid, I grew up under a single-parent household with just my mom, as well as my grandma and her boyfriend at the time. I was a pretty happy kid, though I admit that I can't really remember all that much of when I was a kid. I do remember that even though I really wanted to get along with a lot of the other kids, I just couldn't. I found myself more just playing with my own toys and making up imaginary worlds rather than actually playing with them. And most of the ones who did stick around or who were quote-unquote friends were just ones who hung around because they thought I acted funny and therefore was funny. I didn't realize until maybe a while that that's not what friends actually are. As I grew, I was a happy and very talkative and open kid. I would be a chatterbox and just chatter on and on and on about stuff and stories and things I found interesting. I was a very happy-go-lucky kid. I remember one traumatic experience that I had when I was a kid was being locked in a dark bathroom in not even a kindergarten, but just a place to have people watch your kids, and that might have been the first thing that sort of made me not trust people. Being scared of the dark, I ended up remembering not being tall enough to open the door. But it didn't really shatter anything for me. I was still a very, very happy-go-lucky kid. Now, it wasn't until 3rd grade that things started to change. The people who had thought I was funny no longer thought I was funny. They thought I was different. Because I was still a very happy-go-lucky kid who had a motor mouth, who loved to learn and loved to talk. But I was weird, and I looked weird, and I talked weird. I was different. I didn't really learn until much later on from my mom that the doctors that I would later go on to have as my psychologist actually wanted to diagnose me as bipolar at a very young age. Bipolar, if you don't know, is a mood disorder. There is no cause for it. Maybe it's genetics, maybe it's something else. All I know is that the closer in relation you are to a person who has it, it increases the likelihood of you yourself having it. My dad has it. So when I was born, I had at least a 50-50 chance of also having it. And I do. Amongst others as well. Starting on 3rd grade would be the start of a long and painful school life. I was bullied from 3rd grade all the way until my very graduation day. The day of graduation, when you're supposed to be happy because you're getting out of high school, I was still bullied and teased and ostracized. It started simple with just name calling, and because I was a very sensitive kid, and I'm still a very sensitive person, as you can probably tell from my voice, I couldn't really put up with it, so naturally I would cry, which got them to tease me more. The parents and the teachers never did anything, no matter how much I complained to my mom and how much she complained to them. They will just move them further away, but that doesn't really stop it when you're in the same vicinity as them and they're not really telling them that they are wrong. But it mostly stayed to name calling, and eventually I learned that if you don't cry and don't show any emotion and don't talk while you're there, that they'll leave you alone and get bored. At least some of them will. Some of them won't see it that way. They'll see it more as a challenge. And as I got to be a teenager and people start growing and people start showing that they're growing up to be men and women or whoever they are, things got a lot worse and a lot more aggressive. I began to feel useless, and I began to feel just so bad about myself that often I would just not want to participate with anything that had to do with anyone. I had no friends until maybe 7th grade, where I actually made a friend with somebody who at first I didn't even want to make friends with because I didn't trust them. The people I had trusted all turned on me because they didn't want to be friends with someone who was being targeted by bullies, because then they'd be bullied as well and they'd be seen as uncool. I had no one to talk to, no one to fall back on, and I couldn't really tell my parents or the teachers because they wouldn't want to do anything. At least not the teachers. My parents, by then, I even had my dad, and they would go and talk to the principal, but they never really did anything. I made friends with this girl, and at first I didn't trust her, but she became somebody I would cling to for a long time just because she was someone I felt like I could trust. And she was, and I ended up making a few other friends, but that did not change how I felt about myself, and it didn't change what was going to happen. 7th through 8th, and even through high school, it went from name calling to throwing things into my hair, and when I'd walk up to lunch, I would get my very long waist-length hair pulled while I was on the stairs. It was actually one of the reasons why I now have my hair cut short, and I refuse to have long hair ever again, just because of the feeling of having my hair pulled for no reason. I started getting shoved into lockers, having my things pushed down, having people do that thing where they try to make you flinch just by passing you, like they're gonna attack you out of nowhere, and then laugh because you did. And of course, it was all my fault. At least that's how the teachers and everybody else treated it. I mean, obviously, I must be the problem if everybody was targeting me. They just move them away and tell me to ignore it. It wasn't until 8th grade that I really started to spiral downward. One of my bullies, the most persistent one, felt the need that just name-calling and pushing me around wasn't enough. No, they wanted to take something from me that has affected me since then. It's hard to talk about sexual harassment. It's hard to talk about that kind of assault, but that's something that did happen, and by a girl no less, so of course no one would believe me, right? I didn't tell anybody. I was afraid to. By then, I had been told by my own vice principal and the guidance counselor that, and I quote, if I didn't act the way I did, if I didn't dress the way I did, then maybe the other kids wouldn't bully me. Maybe the other kids would get tired. If I tried to be like everybody else, then maybe I wouldn't be dealing with what I was dealing with. I was blamed by the very school I was going to for the things that were happening to me, and for my own feelings that I couldn't control. I was in a downward spiral, going down and down, but I couldn't tell anybody because I was afraid that even the people I cared about most would not believe me. And so I became angry, I became hostile, I became a very horrible person to people that I didn't trust, and that included my parents now, because I didn't trust them either, because I felt like I could not trust anyone but myself, and so I held it in, and I kept a straight face, and I acted like it didn't affect me, that I taught myself not to make any facial expressions. I taught myself to weave in and out of crowds so I could avoid people as quickly as possible. I taught myself not to show any emotion towards the people that were harming me, which ended up making me emotionally stunted to the people around me, because not even they could tell how I felt. So when I ended up having a complete and utter psychotic episode right before an Easter break in 8th grade, it almost seemed like it was coming out of nowhere, and yet it was foreshadowed for years. I had stopped eating, I had stopped bathing, I was constantly getting into fights with my own mother because I just felt so angry, because I was just so hurt. And some of the things I did during that episode I do regret, and some of them I just can't even say. But the thing I think I regret most is after the fight, going into my bathroom and trying to kill myself. Now I've had maybe 1 or 2 other episodes since then in my 23 years of life, and each and every time there's always something that cuts through the mind fog that comes with this kind of thing and makes me see what is happening and makes me realize the horror of the situation and of what it's made me feel and say and done. And that's exactly what happened this time. I ended up running downstairs maybe 10 minutes afterwards and confessing what I had done and being driven to the hospital. I remember sitting in the emergency room and my dad asking me why, and I remember my answer probably hurting him. I remember being in the hospital and being questioned as I puked out my guts, while my mom held my hair back despite all the things I had said to her. I remember being taken to one of those suicide watch homes for kids and being afraid and scared and crying because I was in a place I didn't know with people I didn't know or trust, and crying on the phone, and my mom telling me and reassuring me that if I just did what they wanted and just held on, I could get out. And about maybe 5 days or so, I did. It was over the Easter weekend too, so that was fun. Surprisingly, there was somebody I did know, somebody that lived down the street from me, and we ended up bonding for a little bit, though I never really talked to her after that, mostly because she was a grade under mine, and at least until high school, our classes and everything didn't intermingle. I didn't learn until a lot later that both my mom and dad had rained complete hellfire down onto the school and onto the vice principal and everyone else. She never told me what they said, but I sort of got the gist that if we had had the money at the time, she would have sued them. Of course, I didn't really change much when I went back, other than some of my friends, because some of their parents were friends with my dad, ended up sort of knowing about the situation and wanting me to feel better, but nobody else knew, thank God. But it didn't really change how the bullies treated me. But I got better at avoiding them, and I started really standing up for myself, because I had made a promise while I was in that facility that I would never let anybody treat me or make me feel like that ever again. And I still hold to that promise, especially freshman year of high school. Freshman year of high school, I had a class with a girl who was just a complete and utter bitch for no reason to me. Because I was weird, because I was different, and maybe it was because I was having fun with friends and joking and I have no idea, but I was a common target, and so I was her target. I still don't know why. We could have easily just gone on with our lives, but apparently shoving me into the side of a locker to the point where I got marks and imprints of the locker on my side were apparently something that she wanted to do just because she thought it'd be fun. It got to the point where, yet again in April, because April always seems to be a time of year that something happens, I'd had enough. I had already had a bad day, and I was just a little off my rocker at the time, and she just continued to bitch. Now, I had been absent the day before, but she had managed to talk the teacher and blaming me into something I wasn't even there for, so I couldn't even go down to lunch until a couple minutes late, which meant that I wouldn't even be able to get lunch because of the lines and the seniors who would push this freshman out of the way and stop us from even getting lunch before they would, which meant that we would have to shove our faces as quickly as possible. And I was pissed. But she kept on running her mouth, So I told her if she didn't stop, I'd punch her. So of course, not thinking I would, with me being smaller than I am now, came up to me and even put her face right there and pointed right to her cheek and said, "Go ahead." And so I did. I don't really remember much after that, to be honest, because I was just so mad. All I know is that my band teacher stuck up for me, and so did a few other teachers, because I had complained to them about what was happening. About how she was teasing me and bothering me and everything else, and for some reason, finally, some teachers are actually trying to do something. So I could still go to this little band Disney thing that was going to be happening literally next week. I'm grateful that people stood up for me. Of course, that got some people to back off of me, but that didn't really stop her from apparently talking some of her friends into trying to jump me after school, which didn't really work because I had marching band practice. So I was surrounded by not only a class of 20-something students that included juniors and seniors, but also the teacher being there. So it did get some people to back off, but of course, as time went on, they continued to bully me, but not to that extent. I ignored them for the most part after that. I didn't care. I've tried to portray myself as cold and as distant as possible. I only talked to the people who I was friends with, and anyone else I would just ignore. I wouldn't let anybody particularly new in. I just kept myself to people I know, and then eventually, if they would introduce me to someone that they trusted, I would slowly open myself up to them as well. I graduated, and I actually ended up losing touch with a lot of those friends. Because, apparently, you're only friends with people when you're in classes and have to be with them for hours at a time. It hurt, but it didn't really hurt as much as I thought it would. I didn't get diagnosed with bipolar disorder until I was 19 and I was in a technical school. I started seeing symptoms in myself that I had seen in my dad growing up, and I was terrified. It wasn't until I started having mood swings and I started saying things that I didn't mean to other people that I realized that I needed help. It was funny because I talked to my therapist and she said that they had been waiting for me to confirm how I was really feeling, because they had suspected for a long time that I was bipolar. But they didn't want to treat me until I actually came to them for help, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but I felt reassured that I wasn't going to be forced into anything just because they thought something. So I got treatment, and I'm continuing to get treatment. I'm getting treatment for it. I'm getting treatment for my anxieties of being around people and groups, and especially people who walk behind me. I don't like it when people touch me, especially even if they're friends and I've known them for a while. I don't like being touched because of the things I've gone through. I don't like having people stand behind me. I don't like having people touch my back and my shoulders and the back of my head because of what I've been through. And there's just so much that I've dealt with that now reflect onto how I act now. But I'm not going to let that define me, and I never will. I continue to open myself up to an audience that accepts me, and I like to believe that they actually do care. I've opened myself up at conventions to people I don't know just because we're wearing similar costumes or because our costumes are the same. Cosplay and things like that have really helped me become more social and open myself up and become more trusting to people, and just generally not be a hermit in a cave like I was acting before. It's because of all this that I've met somebody who has been supporting me for almost 7 or what will be 8 months when this comes out, who loves me and tries to understand. And it's always going to be a fight. There's no cure for what I have. But I can't just sit and wallow in the feelings that I feel, the sadness and the anger and the just wanting to get even with other people because of what they've done. Instead, I fuel that into these videos, I fuel that into my job, I fuel that into the things that I make, whether it be artwork or just anything, because I want to feel like I'm worth something. I want to take what I've made for myself, and I want to rub it in the faces of the people who told me I would never be anything at all. When 10 years comes and I have to go to some sort of 10-year anniversary, I want to show them what I've done. I want to show them that I'm not the person that they used to push around anymore, that I am somebody. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe me living out of spite isn't something that people should do, but that's what really gets me going. It motivates me to prove people wrong. And this channel motivates me too. It motivates me to keep a schedule. It motivates me to talk to more people. It motivates me to do more. Like, I'm doing art. I've actually just recently been asked, as of this date, to help with my artwork on a dating sim. Something I never would have even thought or wanted or believed I could ever achieve if it had not been for me trying to reach out and trying to do things I normally do, trying to overcome what I've been through to become a better person and to be able to show all that I've done. Mental illness is not something that can be cured. Mental illness is not something that can truly be defined by just a definition, because it's different for each person, but the fight is all the same. The only thing you can do is dust yourself off and keep going. There are going to be pitfalls, there are going to be times you're going to fall, there's going to be times that you will fail, but all you can do is get back up and keep trying. And maybe you'll find people along the way who will help and who are doing the exact same thing you are. And you'll bond and you'll have friends and you'll live a life not defined by simply a pill. I probably sound like some weepy idiot throughout this whole thing, but I had hoped through recording this that maybe, just maybe, hearing this, I don't know, might relate to somebody else who might currently be going through it. I'm in a better place, a more confident place, but there are some people who may not be. And maybe knowing that they're not alone, maybe that might help. I don't know. I'm just some person on the internet with barely 1K subscribers talking into the void. But who knows? If it helps even one person. If I can make them get that promise and make them promise that they'll never let anybody make them feel like that again, just like I have, then maybe it's worth it. Until next time. See ya.